Well, if you watch cable news or read the Washington Post, you know America has only one enemy in the world. It's called Russia. But the truth may be more complicated than that. The biggest threat to this country is not Vladimir Putin. That's ludicrous. The biggest threat, obviously, is China. China spies on us more than any other country. It is behind the massive OPM hack carried out from 2012 through 2014. It has, of course, the world's largest population. It will soon have the world's largest economy. Its military is growing rapidly in strength. It even manufactures most of the fentanyl that is killing tens of thousands of Americans every year. Americans assume that this country is on top and will be forever, but could we find ourselves overtaken before we know it, imminently even? Michael Pillsbury is the director for the Center for Chinese Strategy at the Hudson Institute and one of the world's great experts on this exact subject. He's the author of the 100-Year Marathon, China's Secret Strategy to Replace America as the Global Superpower. He joins us tonight. Mr. Pillsbury, thanks for coming on.
Hi, thank you.
So you've written, I think, the central book on this question. So we'll just stipulate that what you say is true, because I think it is obviously true. So the question, which is, China wants to displace the United States as the most powerful nation in the world. Why isn't our leadership, political, media, cultural, sounding the alarm on this? Because it's happening.
Well, there's lots of pretty good reasons. Lots of companies and individuals have made large amounts of money in China. I hate to be so crass about it, but I have a colleague who invested $200 million. 6 years later, he had $2 billion in return. That can be a pretty big motivator. Second, you have inertia. You have the opening by Kissinger and Nixon, the Bush family being very proud of their connections with China. You have this almost a strong effort 10 years ago to set up G2, America and China together would sort of rule the world. That was backed by Henry Kissinger, Zbigniew Brzezinski, Hank Paulson, and quite a few people feel very strongly that the U.S. and China together can kind of control the world. I've had admirals and generals tell me that they want to cooperate with the Chinese military. So this goodwill feeling of cooperation with China is the way to go. That's still very strong. I think that explains also why President Trump has a lot of pressure on him from the bureaucracy, from some in Congress, not all. Chuck Schumer, of all people, supports President Trump's tariffs, for example. But this momentum is still there. The third thing is what I would call intelligence failure. The U.S. intelligence community has been wrong about several major things from 1950 on, and it looks like understanding just how sophisticated China was going to be in ripping off our technology, jobs, influencing our political system, that seems to have been gotten wrong. I think the intelligence community is back on track now. They're doing very well. But that also caused a kind of a sluggishness in our response to China, I would say. Now we're much faster, though. Over the last 6 months or so, a great deal of change has taken place in the U.S. understanding of China.
I hope that's right. So back to something you said a second ago, and I've heard people say that we can kind of share the world stage, share management of the world with China.
Right.
Does China have any interest in sharing that with us?
You know, they turned us down. Several people made these offers of the so-called G2 plan, and the Chinese scholars who are allowed to talk about it in articles and books said, no, you know, we really don't want to be number two as a junior partner with America. So they're waiting for later when I think they'll be number one, unless we take a lot of steps to make it not happen. We've got to deny them technological supremacy. That's the first thing. The second thing is we've got to understand better how deeply embedded they are in our companies, in our social life, in our academic world. We really don't we had a luxury with the Russians of the Soviet Union was way over there. We didn't have much to do with them. They certainly didn't have any massive business enterprises with us. China is deeply inside us. And so we don't want to demonize them totally. We cause problems in our own political system. But we've got to be more aware of just how sophisticated they are.
Well, we're spending the next month on a special series on China, and I hope that you will come back, Michael Pillsbury, for that. Can't think of a more important topic. I appreciate your coming on tonight. Thank you. Well, China is clearly a threat to our economy, if nothing else, and becoming more threatening. What can our Congress do about it? Senator Marco Rubio is a Republican representing the state of Florida, and he joins us tonight. Senator, thanks a lot for coming on. You just wrote what I thought was a really interesting op-ed about China, and you have this line in here, which I think all of our viewers should be familiar with, and I'm quoting you. Chinese theft of American intellectual property alone cost the U.S. nearly $600 billion annually, eclipsing the combined profits of the top 50 companies in last year's Fortune 500 list. That's a remarkable number. Why is no one doing anything about that?
You know, for the same reason that this is an issue that surprised me. You know, for years I kind of been a traditionalist on it all, thinking, like most people did, that eventually it would all work out, they'd become more democratic. And then I started getting involved in the human rights issues in China, and that led me to kind of understand the broader plan they have in place. And this is not an economic plan on their part or a development plan. This is a plan to undermine not just our competitiveness, but the competitiveness of every country in the world and become the dominant nation, the dominant economic, industrial, and technological power. And they're using multiple tools, including intellectual property theft, to do that. So not only are they undermining our industrial base, they are also undermining our technological base through something called Made in China 2025, where they intend not just to supplant America, but all countries on Earth and the West in automobiles and passenger aircraft, in quantum computing and artificial intelligence. They've laid out the entire industries, and they're slowly but surely carrying out this plan.
So this is a threat, obviously not simply to our economy, but to our predominance around the world, to our power and to our values. Why are American industries not saying more about this?
Some of them are starting to. Some of them are making some money over there. And, you know, when CEOs, many of these multinational corporations, they consider themselves to be citizens of the world, these CEOs are going to be gone in 8 years. They don't feel, many of them don't feel any special obligation to the United States. They feel an obligation to maximize return for shareholders. And as a result, if they've got a good thing going over there making money, who cares if they're stealing technology and in 10 years the company won't even be able to compete with them? It's working out in the short term, and that makes them look good. So that's a part of it. Others are beginning to complain, but they're afraid to say so because they don't want to get kicked out. Just the other day we heard two airlines, United and American, are being told that unless they stop defining Taiwan as a country, they no longer will be able to fly there. I mean, they're threatening them with hundreds of flights and billions of dollars in revenue. Marriott fired an American worker about 6 months ago because the worker put up a tweet, or liked a tweet about Tibet. And they fired an American over a tweet that the guy put up by mistake. So that's what's happening. And so we've got a bill that addresses it. And if I could briefly walk through the 5 points on it, because they're important. Number one, we would prohibit the transfer. Yeah, we would prohibit the transfer of any and all technologies that are sensitive, things like quantum computing and biosciences and artificial intelligence and the like. The second thing we would do is we would place a tax basically on excess Chinese investment in the United States. How that works basically, they come, let's say they buy $10 billion of Fortune 500 stocks. That will raise the price of the stock. That will issue revenues, dividends. They then take that dividend money and they use it to buy U.S. treasuries, which increases the price of the dollar, the value of the dollar, thereby making American exports more expensive than a Chinese export, thereby destroying our capacity. And so this is not economic development on their part. This is a strategic use of investment as a weapon to undermine our production capacity. We would also put a tax on American companies entering joint ventures with Chinese companies, because what they do is they make you partner with them, and then they steal your technology, your intellectual property, and all of a sudden they become your global competitor. They kick you out, and they put our companies out of business. And these are the kinds of things that we're going to be looking at and in this bill to put in place to even the playing field. Let me just say this. This is not an economic issue. This is not a trade issue. This is not a tariff issue. This is the single most important geopolitical issue of the last 100 years. It will define what the 21st century turns out to be.
I couldn't agree with you more, and I'm grateful that you're saying this. I'm a little baffled why more people aren't saying it, but I hope they will after hearing you say it. So thank you, Senator. Good to see you.